Okay, welcome everyone to Finance Committee, January 17th, 2023. And we will start with approval of minutes from November 21st.
Motion.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to presentations and discussions, starting with the Upper Hanover Authority tapping fees. Move that over to Dan.
All right, so an update on the tapping fees. I know last time we discussed this was back in November. Since then, Doug has heard back from Upper Hanover Authority that they're going to allow us to pay these next budget year. So just to refresh everybody's memory, it relates to the 24 EDUs, that totaling $85,392. And as it says here, due to the unexpected nature, Doug had that conversation. They're being gracious enough to allow us to pay this in next budget year.
That's great. I suggested that as well. So good. That's great.
Solid suggestion. And then also here, the authority did waive the $25,000 that was Hereford, just to reiterate that at least there was another piece of positive news on top of deferring the payment till July.
Okay, excellent.
But you guys have gone to that meeting as well.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Probably wasn't quite as diplomatic as Doug was, but okay.
Next topic on the agenda was a review of charter schools, and just going to go through overall enrollment, tuition, and kind of what it's looked like over the past few years here.
Can you set that into the display mode?
Yeah. Let's see if it's going to let me do it this way or not.
Yeah, it should, actually.
I think I got to switch the way that I'm sharing.
All right, sorry.
There we go.
All right. So as you can see here, we went back to the 1920 year and then forward to 2021, 21-22, and the current year. The breakdown here is between general ed and special ed enrollment at our charter schools. This includes both cyber charter and brick and mortar. We didn't break it out for this particular presentation. We could go into that level of detail if need be as we kind of move forward with it. But to give just kind of an overview, we saw a significant increase in that 2020-2021 year, as the committee's aware, and we're seeing a gradual decrease at this point. Right now we're at 169 students, and so we're seeing gains. As far as having students return, which is always good. We feel like we can educate them better here in district, and it's a more affordable price.
Yep.
To go through the tuition rates, and going back to 1920. So at the time, for a gen ed student, it was just under $13,000, and a special ed student was just over $27,000. You'll see it's been kind of in that ballpark, and this year we've had a significant increase. This is due to essentially the calculation that relates to our budget. PDE has a form that I'm going to pull up in just a second that essentially dictates and calculates out how much your student is going to cost at a charter school, and what your charter school rate is on both a gen ed side and a special ed side. And that, you'll remember, is part of the conversation of where are we going to budget some of those dollars. The unexpected increase that we had in charter school tuition back in 2020-2021, when we budgeted for the 21-22 year, we set aside tuition dollars in a separate account, basically the budgetary reserve account, because we were unsure of what those expenses were going to be. And that factors into the calculation per the PE 363, which I'll pull up here. Should be on there. So essentially, what we do on an annual basis is complete this data entry sheet that PDE publishes, and it's based on the budget information from the prior year. And so we go through the budget and fill out all the information as it pertains to general education, special education, VOTEC, et cetera. And there are exceptions as far as deductions for the overall expenses. So when PD is figuring out essentially how much your tuition is going to cost, for your student going to the charter schools, there are deductions in that amount. It's not a matter of, okay, you have a budget of $70 million and you have 3,000 students, 70 million divided by 3,000 students, that's how much your students cost. It's not that simple. There are exceptions then for federal funds, so they don't hold that against you. With the federal funds that you have, it's not your local funding. So when it comes down to paying for charter school tuition, they don't expect you to make up those federal dollars for the charter school tuition.
That's a nice one.
So we scroll down here. And I should mention also, this is over the average daily membership. So opposed to, okay, say we have 3,300 students, we'll go back to 3,300 students. The average daily membership takes into account actual student days in the district. So it's not as simple as, okay, your enrollment as of October 1st was 3,300 students. That's what your enrollment is. It is actually based on your average daily membership from the prior year, which is calculated, and PDE publishes that at the end of the fiscal year.
Can I ask a question, or would you prefer we wait till the end?
No, sure.
So does the average daily membership take into account the 150 students we're paying for to be in a charter school?
No. So they're not.
Shouldn't it? I mean, if we're paying for them to be,
Somewhere? Yeah.
why, don't you think, if we're spending money on educating them
Then it's
at
still our
a
money.
charter school, that should be we should have 3,300 and the 150,
Right.
to me, logically, but you're saying no?
No,
Do we get to deduct the costs that we spend on charter schools?
No, and that's where I'm going to go next. So to your point, so those jumping ahead. No, it's a fair question. So those enrollments are not included, and to your next question, for the instructional costs, they're going to still fall into this regular education box, this first box here. Tuition for a regular ed or general ed student at a charter school still gets included in the overall expenditures. It doesn't factor into the deduction calculation that would be listed here. So this is only listing deduction for federal dollars that essentially the district wouldn't have to be responsible for when it comes down to this calculation for tuition. However, the cost of the tuition itself is included in the overall expenditures. It's not pulled back out. So essentially
They make us pay more.
we're paying based on expenditures that we're already
Inflated.
paying, for the charter school tuition. I'm probably not making this very clear, because I have a feeling I'm not.
They're inflating what we're paying based on the inflated payment that we're making for charter schools.
Right, so
Too.
I'll go down to this.
That makes sense.
I'll
So
come
we get
back.
more federal dollars because we're paying for them to go to a charter school.
No, they're
No,
not.
I'll-
But we at least get federal dollars that go towards them?
We get, no, this is
No.
federal dollars.
I'm not understanding.
Let me bring it back around. So,
Federal
for-
dollars are deducted from what they figure that number out to be. They don't, if you get federal money, they just kind of carve that out. And that, whenever they actually do the division to get to those numbers of the 14,000 and 31,000, the federal dollars are pulled out.
So for example, then down at the bottom here, we have this line item for 5,000, other financing uses. So essentially, any of the debt service that the district has incurred gets backed out of what would be calculated into a tuition rate. The logic there would be, we're doing that for our facilities, it's not part of the instructional aspects of the school, so it wouldn't be part of your charter school tuition. What we've done in the past couple of years, is we've also put in the unexpected amount that we thought we were going to incur for charter school tuition. Because it was above and beyond what we had seen back from, prior to the pandemic, so that 1920 school year, where it was drastically lower enrollment, about 120 students opposed to 195 at its peak, and 169 now. We've taken some of those budget dollars and put them into that other financing uses, this 5,000 funding, function code that essentially reduces the expenses that are available for the tuition calculation. It pulls back on that. The issue that we're kind of seeing is the charter school tuition and the charter school enrollments having come down drastically back to pre-pandemic numbers. So continuing to budget in that line item becomes questionable.
Right.
I say, I don't know that there's nothing that says can't do it. But are we in that new norm where 169 students in charter schools is the new norm and we should be budgeting in that area? But to budget in that area would also have the impact of increasing the overall tuition, because those dollars then become part of the tuition calculation. I think that we're okay where we are as far as doing, budgeting for those
That extra
that
dollars.
extra dollars outside of the tuition object code, because we are seeing, even though it is gradual, we are seeing a decrease. We are seeing a return of students from charter, and so even though it wasn't that drastic decrease as it was an increase during the pandemic, we are seeing that tick down. So I think it's still justifiable to say we're going to keep those dollars budgeted in that budgetary reserve area as we move forward, as everything kind of tends to, comes back down into a normal, whatever that end game is for new normal.
Right.
It's certainly not 195 like it was last year, 2 years ago. We're not back at 120, but I think that it would make more sense to continue to do basically the budgeting process.
Yep, as long as they're okay with it.
Yeah, there's nothing that prohibits that by any means.
Okay.
I had a meeting the first week of January with Mrs. Bass, Mrs. Rothermel, and Mrs. Hartley, who helps out with cyber, and we're in the process of creating a survey to all of that 169 families to find out why they're there, are they interested in coming back, what can we do, are there other things that they're interested in seeing us do. As a general interest survey, yes, it's financial in some aspects, but as Dan said, we also feel that we're able to provide a better, solid education based upon where some of the schools are. And we're not casting stones on those schools, but the numbers are what they are. So there is process in place, and that's part of the work that Sarah and Molly are doing to get some of that information, ask some of those questions, and see if there are things that can be done. We have a plan in terms of next steps and following up, and we'll share that information when we get it. But hopefully there are some that maybe even the initial reach out or asking the question, if they're on the fence, maybe a good step in bringing that. So when you're talking about 31,000, just say, 14,000. So you can tell what 6 or 7 students is $100,000 when you take a look at it. And if you have a special ed student, you're talking 31,000. So
I know, I see them in the listing every month.
Yeah.
Breaks
Yeah.
my heart.
So that's kind of what I tasked them with doing and taking a look more at that. And now's the time when we're talking about, the recruitment and the process for course selection and all those things are happening, if not now, in the next
Soon.
month or so.
Yeah, okay,
So there's work being done in that area as well.
good.
I know a question was raised, I think, the last time we were talking about charter schools, and specifically it was, the interest in a gen ed student or a student who was identified as general ed here at district, who then went to charter school and was suddenly identified as special ed. I don't have specific information on it, but I have had conversations with other business administrators in the county, and that's not something that they're seeing on a regular basis. Everybody's kind of keen to it and kind of keeping an eye on it, but it's not anything that's been widespread that anybody's seen a trend of students exiting public school, going to charter, and all of a sudden just in order to generate more profit,
Right.
being identified as
That's
special
good.
ed.
We don't need any scams, that's good.
So with those numbers you provide, it's roughly $3 million,
Yeah.
in terms of the budget line.
So that's the next slide, Alan.
Looks like it there. You're right on top of that.
Speed reader.
Yeah.
So
it's
Alan
almost
gets a
double
gold,
what it
Alan gets the
was.
gold star.
Yeah.
But it has increased dramatically. We are seeing it tick down here. But to Alan's point, any gains that we can see as far as bringing students back,
Yes.
it goes a long way.
Sure does.
Well, this is one of the things that we were worried about the past 2 years when we were doing the budget,
Right.
so.
Yep.
And in the past 2 years, we were budgeting over $1 million of additional funds for charter schools. And as you'll see,
We used it.
roughly, 1.8 to, over 3. I mean, we're using it. We'd like to not use it. We like to use it for the students who are in our buildings on a daily basis and keep it, in district, essentially. But so I just want to put this out there as far as we're moving into budget season and looking at our current enrollment with charter, we're going to be looking and, be roughly at the same spot as we are, for the 22-23 year. It might tick down a little bit. I think as we budgeted, last year we budgeted for like 175 students, so if we're at 169, we're already, ahead of the game, and as we, hopefully draw some more students back in, we'll be looking even better, but as we move forward, I will anticipate having this additional budget line item for charter schools in that $1 million area, ballpark.
Yep. Okay.
I think that's the last on the charter schools. Any questions or further discussion on charter?
No. I'm good.
Okay.
Okay. Hang on. Stop a couple minutes. Okay. All right. Next, we'll move on to the 23-24 referendum exception data.
So just wanted to bring this to the committee's attention. By the end of the calendar year, PDE has to essentially let districts know what fiscal data is to be used or considered the most recent when calculating referendum exception eligibility. So we did get that email there. It's determined that the 21-22 fiscal data is what would be considered for referendum. It's kind of a moot point, given that we're moving forward with the opt-out as was just approved. But I did want to let you know that this is it was the 21-22 fiscal data that is the most recent, and that as kind of move forward year over year, and knowing that other building projects and things of that nature are always on the horizon as we move forward. Referendum, well, usually never passes, but from the exceptions perspective, from an ability for PSERS and for special ed, those exceptions do come into play. So that might be an area of that we'll have to look at as we move forward. It's not a true referendum that goes on a ballot to say, okay, this is, we need to get, buy-in on the overall, constituency. But when we come down to exceptions for special ed or PSERS, this will factor in if we need additional dollars above and beyond the index as we move forward. Never a popular topic, so again, it's probably the opt-out this year, but I did want to let the committee know.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, move on to the 23-24 budget timeline.
All right, so just to review, just a nice busy slide here that, let's see, has been adjusted for Martin Luther King Day and President's Day. So this would be what we're looking at as far as overall budget timeline that includes both expectations from the board and the committee as well as administratively. So this past Friday, proposed budgets were due, and departments had populated our spreadsheets to for their draft or proposed budgets for the 23-24 school year. Currently going through salary, we will be going through salary and benefits. And now the next step from having those budgets submitted are going to be having meetings with each individual department and building to review that. They're given the ability to provide more detail as far as each line item, what was going into each line item, and then we'll be having those discussions over the next couple of weeks. This is mostly just a refresher and a reminder of what we kind of went over at the last meeting.
So we moved that June meeting, June 12th, moved that up a week, right? So that it was happening before
Yeah.
the board meeting. And
Yeah.
the reason there's only one meeting in June was we pushed the board meeting back a week and eliminated the workshop, more so to give it 30 days notice from the May posting through, so.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we've done the same, or similar this past year, where when the final finance committee meeting was going to fall after the board meetings,
Yeah.
it's not,
Yeah, it's not fair.
that doesn't really
It's
matter.
not
We
fair.
got to bump that up and make sure that.
Would have made that meeting very simple, though.
Yes.
It would have, but not as entertaining, right? So
Yeah.
it gives us an opportunity to kind of review the budget one last time before bringing it back
Yes.
for an overall vote
Yep.
at the June 15th meeting.
Okay. On to the preliminary salaries and benefits.
So I will caveat this as much as possible. These are very preliminary, and I'll kind of go through, as you can see in front of you, this is essentially the percentage of salaries made up by each employee type. And so administrative, professional, the third one is nurse, security, communication, and some supplemental, maintenance, admin support, custodial, and paras. So one thing that you'll notice very, very drastically is that the professional contract, the professional salaries make up the majority of our salaries. And so absent a CBA, it makes projecting and budgeting salaries a wee bit difficult.
A little bit.
But that was not, there was no, we couldn't push off having a conversation at least on salaries and benefits, even though we do have a lot up in the air. It's such a large portion of the budget that it needs to be discussed,
Can't
even
ignore
though it's still a giant question mark when it comes down to it. So it's preliminary in that sense because there's a big chunk of it that is still up in the air. We're still discussing then what other needs we're going to have as far as overall district needs when it comes down to supporting students and supporting district operations. So this is by no means, and that's why it was full-on caveat of,
Well,
it's still up in the air.
our total budget is what, 60,
70, it
70?
was 70. 72.
72 this year, I think.
Yeah,
I was thinking
it was
about 69
72.
originally. Okay, so 72, if we say 72, I mean, right there, just in overall salaries, if you can total them all together, we're roughly 20, well,
You're going to jump ahead.
25, 26.
I've got that.
Okay.
I've got that.
Yeah, so it's,
You know,
yeah.
calculator
So
over here.
45% of our budget is salary.
Yeah, I remember that pie chart.
Yep.
But not having the CBA also means we don't, it's hard to even figure out
Yeah,
health
could be more,
insurance.
yeah.
I mean, it's so many of our budget stuff, it's gonna be so difficult.
It is, and I think that's going to
Worst case scenario.
Right. Now,
And that's scary.
Mhm.
ideally, we have this all hammered out, as early as possible, and we'll have that squared away, through fact finding, and we'll be able to get accurate figures.
Well,
to the
timeline
committee.
on fact finding though is what, 45 days after?
Yep, and that's February.
Is what they come out, well, we have fact finding February 10th.
Mhm.
45 days after that, they come out with the
And then we still have
recommendation.
to,
And then we still have
15 more days?
15 days on top of that. So you're looking at,
Yep,
we'll say
Beginning of
75
April.
days before worst
April.
case scenario.
Right. So right now, as far as factors that are being taken into account, would be some areas that were already being discussed through negotiations, taking some of those factors into account, not going into much detail. And then also, what we are able to do is already build into the calculation what we anticipate our non-CBA salaries to be.
Mhm.
So while not the lion's share of salaries, those numbers can be hammered out, and we can have good figures, at least for a portion of it. But we can't just sit stagnant while waiting for the CBA to be set. So to go through that, and I think that's, well, this is almost where Keith was going. I think it's on a future slide here, but the allocation of salaries, and this is on a draft 23-24. So as I said, it's based on some of the assumptions that we've had through some of the negotiations, as well as what we have, any increases that are included in any of our compensation plans have been taken into account here. So overall, again, you can see that the percentage of salary, the lion's share is the professional contract. So still keeps a big question mark, but we'll be able to hammer out, the other amounts as well as we kind of move forward.
Our agreements, our comp plans that we have, the 3 that we're going to go over, that's for next year as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I was making sure I was right in my thinking. Okay.
So I wanted to show a trend of budget to actual, and so I will say that the 22, 23, and 23, 24, you'll see that they're exactly the same. They're not really exactly the same, they're just, since we're in the middle of the 22, 23, I can give you what they are right now. I can project out what salaries are going to be for the entire year, but we have some unfinished business with the 22, 23 year that there's a giant question mark too, so salaries are tough to project out. So those are just the same just for argument's sake, but you'll see that as far as budget to actual salaries, we've typically been under budget when it comes to salaries. I know this has been a topic of discussion at prior meetings, and it's been one thing that I've been looking at as we kind of move through budgeting, both last year and then this year. We're always budgeting the actual, and so it's been interesting to me to come down to, at the end of the year, we've budgeted the actual expenditures. There wasn't fluff in those figures. That was the actual anticipated expenses based on personnel that we had and positions that we had available. And then we get to the end of the year and sit here and go, well, how am I off by $1 million? And it's been something that I've sat there and stared at and I'm going, this doesn't make sense. But as we kind of go through the year, any open positions that
All those leave approvals all
is,
Yeah.
reduced salary.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when we do have leaves,
You have the actual salaries for 23, 24 already?
no.
Of course you got it.
That's yeah, it would be nice, right? No,
Dan, the soothsayer.
I ran the risk of either zeroing it out
Yeah.
and then having that question, or just say it's
There
not
it
the
is.
actual.
This is a number.
So leaves have a big impact on the salary. If we anticipate that, even if it's a bachelor's step one teacher at 47,000 and change, and then they're out. If they're out, we're not paying the salary. If we do bring in, a sub, and it's subservice, it doesn't hit salaries. It
I was
hits-
going
it
to
hits
say, what
contract.
you're seeing in here is not reflected in what we're outlaying in another category.
Correct.
Right.
So there is something of a,
There is, and now when we look at the contracted service, when we're budgeting contracted service, you run the risk of, okay, so should we shortchange contracted service and not have enough in that account to, and hopefully they all balance out. What we do when we budget for contracted services, we look at the trend of use, what we've been using for contracted service, what we've been using for subs and OT and PT and stuff like that. And we're budgeting what we've been spending. And then on the flip side, then on the salary side, the argument is, all right, well, should you only budget 98% of your salaries? Well, that's a hard sell. I mean, no, we know what the salary numbers are supposed to be. We have to budget that.
It's all a snapshot in time anyway, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's been these differences, and what it looks like a variance in salary, it's really just that unknown. Even when we have open positions, if they sit vacant, well, they're unfilled. Well, we budgeted for a full year for a position. And if it goes unfilled, well, then
We save that money.
we save
Yeah.
that money, but at the end of the year, and I know it's been, part of the conversation's been, we save the money, but, it looks like your budget was way out of whack or skewed.
Right.
So bringing this to, to the committee's attention, just want to point out the fact that we are budgeting at, at salary, anticipated salary. It's not with any, margin of increase, 2% over salary. We're budgeting, the staff we have plus the positions we have. It just doesn't always come out because it's a budget. It's going to be inaccurate come day one. It's probably going to be, and it sounds kind of awful to say, but it's going to be inaccurate on June 15th when it gets passed, because come June 16th, something's
Someone's gonna
changed.
retire.
Something's already changed.
Or
So-
retired.
well, look at just
But the idea is to continue to try and
resignations.
narrow this as much as possible, and if part of it is then, okay, making those adjustments in the contract service, or, budgeting, moving things around a little bit differently, that's always kind of on the table.
But at least we can see the trend and we know what's going on, and we have an explanation for it.
Yep.
Benefits, they kind of mimic salaries, where, benefits are following salaries for a lot of the case. So,
Does that include PSERS as well?
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this includes, you know, all of the health benefits, PSERS, Social Security, you know, payroll taxes, workers' comp, unemployment, so the whole gamut of benefits.
That could definitely vary widely, because you could have somebody retire who has their spouse and
Family.
2 adult children on it, and you hire somebody who's 22.
And that's
that,
it.
You know,
Oh, sure.
so what a huge difference that can make.
Sure.
Yeah.
No wonder the numbers are so different.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the sense that when budgeting new positions, we do take the conservative approach to say, okay, we have a new position, or we have a retirement, we know this is coming, what should we budget? Well, from a salaries perspective, you know, we could be budgeting at, you know, a master's step 5, you know, if that's what we are anticipating, you know, on the average or on the upper end. But when it comes to benefits or you know, health and dental and RX, we take the conservative approach and say, okay, we're going to assume that we hire somebody who is going to elect our most expensive health plan, which is going to be family coverage, you know, 10, 20, 70. That's what we're anticipating or expecting. We've had conversations over, should we find some weighted average, you know, to say, okay, well, X percentage of our staff carry single, X percent carry, you know, employee and spouse, et cetera, and then come up with a weighted average, which is going to be some dollar amount other than any of the standard coverages.
Yeah.
Would it be more accurate? Not necessarily. It's all based on the person that you get to come through the door, you know, the person that you hire. So from a budgeting perspective and ensuring that we have enough funds available to pay for the expenses that we could possibly incur, we budget for essentially the top tier of our benefits.
Yeah, again, it's only a snapshot, so it is what it is.
Right. And so, you know, this is just another area where historically we're having these conversations, and I know we've had this conversation in committee of, you know, budget to actual, and we see these variances. Again, from the health and medical benefit side, it's because we are budgeting on the conservative side, because again, it's tough to not. You don't want to come up short.
Right.
And then at the end of the year, we've overexpended the budget. I don't want to find out. I've heard enough that the state doesn't appreciate that. The Auditor General is not a huge fan of local governments overspending their budgets. I've asked the questions like, what happens? I haven't gotten a great answer. I was like, is it a slap on the wrist? Is it? Nobody wants to find out.
Is it,
So
what are you doing? Yeah. Okay.
it could lead into that, I'm sure. So.
Well, this is actually a benefit for us in these 2 areas, because what we save in this helps us offset when we have adverse conditions like we've had a couple in the past few years.
We aren't talking about that. Yeah.
No, we're not talking about that. We're speaking generalities. So, you know, God forbid, you know, a meteorite comes and takes out a section of a roof or something. You know, that's an unexpected expense that we can now offset by our historical savings in this, even though we've been doing it conservatively
Right.
the whole time.
Right.
So,
And that has been the case. I mean, you know, we've had budget
Mhm.
transfers.
Yes.
We've been able to build up, you know, the capital reserve, and then Melanie
Yes.
decided to spend it all on the Giza project. No, I'm kidding. But no, we've spent it on the Giza project.
Okay.
We've drawn that down a bit, and we're going to see the benefits of that kind of as we go forward with energy savings. But we're going to see other projects come up. I know Doug's got a list.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, we'll be seeing them next week, right? So that's the overall benefits, and then combined salary and benefits, you'll see as we kind of trend upward and onward. You know, we're currently in the 22-23 school year. Salary and benefits are 46.4 million. My very preliminary salary and benefits projection for next year is closer to that 47.6 million. It's the major piece of the overall budget. So, like I said, it's still preliminary, it's well preliminary, but I needed to point out how substantial a piece of the budget it is, just to continue to hammer that home, as we kind of get into it. And there's, to a degree, outside of negotiations, there's a little wiggle room.
Yeah.
Once the CBA is settled, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where we're going to end up. We can project out 3 years, because we'll have good information, and we'll have a settled contract that will say, okay, we know what to anticipate through the life of the contract. Until then, it's
Not too sure.
a little question. And then we can't not talk about the PCERS rate. It's actually, for next year, it's actually good news. So
Oh, I was looking.
we're here at 22 to 23. Where PCERS came out and actually certified that the rate for next year is going to be 34 flat. So that's a decrease from this 35.26% down to 34%. So that, my mouse keeps disappearing, so I'm going to stop. So that is a savings that kind of gets balanced out by any increases in overall wages. But you'll see that the projection from PCERS moving forward is steadily increasing. So
Those are their projections?
those are their projections. Not my projections, but they're not on PCERS. But this is their projection. It's always subject to change. If I showed this from last year, the 34, and I should have looked it up, the 34 was above that 35.26. It did not have this dip.
Okay.
So anything can happen. If PCERS has better returns than expected, they don't need to increase the rate. They won't, but this is what the expected increase is long term. So it's still projecting upward. We do have part of the fund balance that's committed for balancing this as we kind of move forward, anticipating that at some point, tax increase is not going to be able to continue to accommodate that. And so those would be one-time dollars that are set aside in the fund balance to assist with paying for the PCERS increase. Realistically,
Well, that's another one that can go with the resolution to opt out. We can opt in for PCERS. That's one of the rules, one of the reasons?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the way that, to kind of go back to the, that prior slide that was talking about the exceptions, it's when your anticipated PCERS expense is going to increase greater than the percentage of your adjusted Act 1.
Okay.
So if you can't make up the difference by going to the Act 1, or it's not really that, it's taking 5%. So if say next year our PCERS expense was going to be a 6% increase, 5% wouldn't cover it, we would be able to file for an exception for the additional 1%, that balance. But that needs to go through essentially, it goes to PDE to approve it, because they need to verify that our budget and our anticipated expenditures are increasing above the index. And then it needs to pass the board as far as adopting something that would go above and beyond the index for those exceptions, whether it be for PSERS or for special ed.
Okay.
And
Yay.
that was it on salaries, benefits, kind of as an overview. I know not a great level of detail, but I think it's mostly because there's a lot of questions. But overall, it's in that right now the $47.6 million range for salary and benefits. Those are going to be dependent. The benefits are going to be dependent on negotiations. The salaries are going to be dependent on negotiations. So that's still up in the air. But the other parts of those, the salaries for basically everybody who's not in the CBA, those we have pretty well honed in because we're able to just reference back to any of the compensation plans and individual contracts and factor that in.
Okay. That's good.
All right. Dr. Roach, are you anticipating any large-scale additions to staff that could affect salaries?
I've kind of told people that this is not the year to add. That I can't anticipate any, there's requests, probably Saturday's conversation about security and contracted services, and or if we head in that direction, that's really one of the areas that I think could have an impact on whether it's staff or contracted services, an increase. I'm sure if we were to facilitate the conversation, every people that would have definite requests, if we were to get an onslaught of students back and we had to increase staff because of that, that would be helpful. But we know there would be some potential savings there. But we're going to continue to check the. I'm not getting any sense, and no one said anything in terms of a larger than normal incoming K class, let's say, which would add things, or I'm not anticipating any major staff requests. I'm trying to think, we haven't really gotten to that level.
Right.
I'm sure there'll be a couple requests. I just know I've said a couple times to at least the admin group that this, with the teacher contract unsettled, and knowing that there's a lot in that conversation, that this may not be the year to request X, Y, or Z. So
We did a bunch of that last year. We did a good job with that last year.
yeah,
Kind of absorbed them in.
yeah.
And we didn't actually, when we got rid of, not that we got rid of, when our numbers went up to the charter and the cyber schools, we didn't cut any staff.
Right.
So hopefully that, it can be absorbed back in the other way, is where I'm going with that.
And we do that, any retirement will be looked at to see if we have to make an adjustment or if it has to be filled. We did that with the other retirements. More so the classroom teachers than in, let's say, PE or art, or that's because the students need those.
Right.
And the teachers need those for their prep years and stuff,
Okay.
I don't anticipate anything coming out of left field again, with the exception of security, that conversation, but just give me a little percentage of wiggle room in case something changes. But right now, I right now, I think we've done a lot in the last bit of time, and you kind of work with that for right now.
Okay.
know
Well, I
it's
think
gonna be a
in
tight
cases
budget
like
year.
that, after what we just saw in there, I think we need a little wiggle room. We do have it with our history there.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah, you could almost look at the
So-
way Dan had the chart there. If you add it up, or even on the combined chart, you can almost see that, and we've talked about this.
1.5 to 2.5.
You can see the
somewhere.
percentage of, or that $2.5 million or whatever it is. I think part of that was, if it would say, there's a $3 million surplus, well, here's why. Those numbers to justify, as opposed to an assumption, which wrongly would be, poor budgeting or something. This is what
Right.
we do, and I said that last year. We do go per person. You can almost go down to the to the teacher or the specific person and know what the increase is. So it is per person. So when we have those leads, which we approve, those are all times where that money is quote unquote saved or Mr. Kenwood goes without a position for 6 months, well, there's a half a salary that's not,
Right.
that's not gonna equal 2 to 1 million, but when that adds up.
And
it
those
does.
things add up, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know there's one position that we've got budgeted that we've had no success in filling, and so, I mean, I was talking with Dr. Farina, it's a $65,000, budgeted expense, it's just the salary, not including the anticipated benefits and, including P-CERS.
So it's 100,000, yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
and so, as that's unfilled, and it's January, and it's
Still
at least-
unfilled.
At least half of that then, so at least
Yeah.
50,000 is saved.
Something
This-
special ed, I remember.
It was more the pupil service, BCBA.
UCBA.
And so it's just been trouble finding. And so if they don't, if we can't find somebody in that position, to hire in that position for the entire year, well, like I said, there's $100,000 that at the end of the year,
Extra.
it's variance. Now, at the
Yeah.
same time, if you're outsourcing and you're going through a third party, but you do have a contracted service, and say it was, say it was 100,000, okay, so it's a wash.
I was saying, if you're contracting out for BCBA, it could very well cost you $100,000
Yeah.
a year.
Yeah, with that.
Yeah.
So you could actually end up being over even.
Right. So it's that balancing act
Right,
of,
it's a-
we have the staff,
I don't envy
the
the-
contracted service, and
The
then,
given.
The trying to figure that out, because,
Yeah, that's not fun stuff.
like I said, it's a little more sophisticated than, throwing darts at, dartboard, but sometimes it feels that way.
Okay. All right, well, that's a start on it. Anybody have anything else? Next.
No, if you could just send us the PowerPoint.
That would be awesome, yes,
I'd
thank
love
you.
that.
Yeah,
Yep,
will do.
Mhm.
okay.
Thank
I
you
would-
very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would entertain a motion to adjourn with our next meeting being February 21st.
I'll make that motion.
All
Second.
right, all in favor? Aye. All right, thanks, everybody.
Ah, I got right on the nose.
Good job. Good job. Oh, boy. So you had a nice vacation?
Good.
Yeah. Say hi to a ghost woman. I saw a commercial and the ghost